We all know the famous opinions of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai about how you light Chanukah candles, starting, like Beis Shammai says, with 8 and then reducing candles each night, or starting with 1 and increasing, as Beis Hillel says. Many of us also know that the Gemara there quotes 2 different opinions to explain the rationale behind Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai's thinking, and very few of us realize that those 2 opinions actually could have practical halachic implications. Tan Rabbanon, so the Gemara tells us, Chanukah, the original mitzvah of Chanukah is that each household lights a lamp on each night of Chanukah. And if you want to be more scrupulous in doing the mitzvah, then every member of the household lights their own lamp each night of Chanukah. And if you want to make the highest level of mitzvah, you want to do the mitzvah in the best way possible, that's when you have a debate. Beis Shammai says first night you light 8 lights and then you reduce as each night of Chanukah goes by. Beis Hillel says the first night you light a single lamp and then you increase lamps each night of Chanukah. Now the question is, why? So there are 2 opinions in the Gemara to explain the rationale behind Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. One argues that Beis Shammai says your menorah is supposed to represent how many days of Chanukah are still to come. So therefore on the first night of Chanukah there's still 8 days to come, second night 7 days, etc. But Beis Hillel says the exact opposite. Each night your Chanukah menorah should reflect how many days of Chanukah have passed. So tonight is the first night, there's a single candle. Tomorrow will be the second night, 2 candles. That's the one opinion. The other opinion says, actually it has nothing to do with Chanukah per se, but rather time at the Beis Shammai that Beis Shammai says we have precedent in the Torah that when they brought the karbanos on Sukkot, the number of bulls reduced each day, so likewise the number of candles reduces each night of Chanukah. Whereas Beis Hillel comes from the perspective that whenever you are dealing with anything of holiness, you should always be increasing the amount of holiness, and therefore you increase the amount of candles of Chanukah. Now, when you hear that language which says that there is a debate between 2 rabbis of the Gemara about the opinions behind Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai's rulings, that implies that word pligi implies that there's a debate over an halachic issue, not only a rationale. They're not only debating how Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai arrived at their conclusions, but pligi implies that these 2 opinions believe that the halacha should pan out differently. And the first place we're going to see what appears to be a debate along these lines is in Tosfos commenting on that Gemara right there, and the Rambam in Hilchos Chanukah. There are many commentators who point out that debate, then the debate between the Rambam and the Tosfos, is based on which view do you go with. That Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai are talking about the days coming or the days past, or that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai are comparing to the bulls of Sukkot, or the principle of always increasing in holiness. So let's briefly look at what the debate between the 2 of them is. So remember, the Gemara told us that the mitzvah of Chanukah is 1 lamp per household. Then Mahadrin is 1 lamp per person within a household. And then you have Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin, which according to Beis Shammai is a declining number of lamps, and according to Beis Hillel is an increasing number of lamps. Now, were they saying that you start off with 1 lamp per household, and then on the second night of Chanukah there are 2 per household and 3 per household, or according to Beis Shammai, the first night there are 8 per household, 7 per household, etc.? That's the opinion of Tosfos. That way, the Mahadrim and Mahadrim is you go from the base level of fulfilling the mitzvah, which is that each household should have a lamp, and the next night there are 2 lamps or 2 lights or 2 candles. In other words, which means that Tosfos goes with a view that on the second night of Chanukah there will be only a total of 2 candles in the household to represent all the members of the household. The Rambam disagrees. The Rambam says no, it goes, there's a base level of fulfilling the mitzvah which is 1 light per household each night. Then there's a more advanced version which is 1 light per person each night, and then there's the most advanced level which is every person in the household increases each night, or in Beis Shammai's opinion decreases each night. In other words, the Rambam believes that Mahadrin ben Mahadrin means that every person starts off lighting their own lamp, and then in addition to that original lamp, then each member of the family, either according to Beis Hillel, increases a light per night or decreases according to Beis Shammai per night, corresponding to all the members of the household. So that debate is tluya b'shtei deis ha'amiroim hanal. Many of the commentators say, well, the reason the Rambam and the Tosfos are debating this is because it depends which opinion you go with as to why Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai said what they said. So l'dei ha'horishoina, let's go back to the original opinion, which was that Beis Shammai is looking at how many days of Chanukah are still to come, and Beis Hillel how many days have already passed. Well then, if that's what we're trying to do, count the days, then logically, you should have a symbol to represent each day that has either passed or is coming. And then there's no logic to say that all the people in the house should light their own candles. One candle tells me it's night number 1. 2 candles tells me it's night number 2. Then I can clearly align the amount of candles with the amount of days. Either in the Beis Shammai's opinion, I'll start with 8 and go to 7, or according to Beis Hillel, I'll start with 1 and go to 2. And it's irrelevant how many members of the household there are. In fact, that would be a distraction. It could actually be misleading. If you have 2 people in the house, somebody's walking past and thinks it's the second night of Chanukah, according to that view. Whereas the second, that would be Tosfos' view. Whereas according to the second opinion, that Beis Shammai is comparing Chanukah candles to the bulls that you bring on Sukkot, which decline in number, and Beis Hillel is bringing in an overarching principle that you always add in issues of holiness. And then I don't mind if the amount of candles in my house doesn't actually illustrate what day of Chanukah it is. It's irrelevant. And that's why that would match the Rambam's opinion, which says, well, on the first night we've got everybody in the household lighting a menorah, and on the second night they either increase or decrease the menorah, depending on if it's Beis Hillel or Beis Shammai. So that's how most people explain the debate. However, we're going to see that it's possible to say the debate between these two Amoraim is not only in the interpretation of what the Mahadrim and Mahadrim version is, which is the debate of Rashi, of Rambam and Tosfos, but even in practice, the way that we light the menorah in practice is we know everybody in the household, or at least the adults in the household, or at least the adult males in the household, light 1 candle on the first night, 2 on the second night, etc. And even then, when the Ramah tells us that that is the simple way of fulfilling Chanukah, which we all do, that everybody lights a candle and everybody increases the number of those candles as we go through Chanukah, still we are still going to find 2 scenarios where there is a practical halachic difference depending on if you're taking the perspective that it's all about the days or that it's about other principles in Judaism, the declining bull numbers, or always adding in matters of Kedusha. Okay, so let's look at scenario number 1. Let's say that you made a mistake, and on the second night of Chanukah, instead of lighting 2 candles, you only lit 1. So now, now the question is, the next night, how many candles should you light? So the first opinion is actually very clear. We follow the opinion of Beis Hillel, which means we have to mark how many days have passed. Doesn't matter that I got it wrong last night. Tonight I have to show how many days have passed. So obviously tonight I have to light 3 candles because it's night number 3. Whereas the second view, who argues says the only reason Beis Hillel says that we've got to increase the number of candles is because always in Kedusha we should increase. Well then, even though it's night number 3, I could actually fulfill my obligation by lighting 2 candles. Why? Because last night I mistakenly only lit 1. That means tonight I'm increasing in Kedusha. That's all I needed. I am now fulfilling the requirement to increase in holiness. Now, we all accept, of course, that this practical halachic difference only applies in an accidental scenario. You can't set yourself up for this. It's only when you didn't really do things the way you meant to on night number 2. But we're going to look at another scenario. We're going to look at a scenario where you got night number 1 right and you got night number 2 right, and now you've run into an obstacle on night number 3, and depending on which view you go with, the way you deal with this challenge is going to be different. It's the third night of Chanukah, and you suddenly realize, oy vey, I only have 2 candles, or I only have enough olive oil to last the requisite amount of time for 2 lamps of Chanukah, and I don't have access, for whatever reason, to more candles or more oil. So now the question is, how many should I light tonight? Now this one you've got to pay attention to, because later on in the Sikha we're going to revisit this one and look at it from a different perspective. So let's remember, according to the first version, Beis Hillel wants us to mark how many days of Chanukah have passed. Now, I don't have enough oil or candles to show that tonight is number 3, so I can't actually achieve this. So if that's the case, that I cannot fulfill the requirement to show in my candles how many days of Chanukah have passed, then logically I may as well just light 1 candle, because I can't fulfill the Mahadrin version, so I may as well fulfill the basic version, which is that each night of Chanukah there should be a single lamp in the house. That I can do. Because if I'm going to light 2 lights on the 3rd night of Chanukah, I'm not actually achieving anything. I'm not making the mitzvah an upgraded mitzvah. Because I don't have enough candles to reflect the days that have passed, which according to Beis Hillel is the Mahadrin version of the mitzvah, at least according to this Amoira. Whereas if I go with the other Amoira, it says, no, the biggest consideration Beis Hillel has is that you are Mailim B'Kodesh, that you're increasing holiness, V'loi Moiridin, or at the very least, you're not declining in holiness. Then you have no option but to light 2 candles tonight, even though it's the 3rd night of Chanukah. Why? Okay, accepted. I'm not fulfilling the Mahadrin version, which is to increase holiness. I know I cannot do that. I don't have enough oil. But at least I'm not backsliding. At least I'm not declining. Because at least tonight I'm not lighting fewer candles than I lit last night. So there's a practical application in 2 different scenarios, one b'di'evet and one even kind of lechatchila, depending on which view we go with, as to why Beis Hillel said what they said. Now, let's take this a level deeper, because what we're going to now analyze is the nature of the links between the rationale according to the one opinion, the days that have passed are the days that are coming, and the rationale behind the other opinion, which is Parei Hechag, or the principle of Mailim B'Kodesh. Now we're going to see that those are 2 very different perspectives. Because these 2 opinions are actually coming from totally different angles about how much link is there between the rationale that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai used and the actual mitzvah of Chanukah. In other words, the simplest way to explain this distinction is, the first opinion says that there is an indelible link between the rationale that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai use and the mitzvah of Chanukah. Because the rationale of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is built on the days of Chanukah. That's obviously integral to the Chanukah story. If it's according to Beis Shammai, I'm looking at how many days are still to come, and if I'm looking at Beis Hillel, it's how many days have already passed. But the fact is that I'm concerned with the mitzvah, the day they experience the holiday of Chanukah, and that's going to determine how I light the menorah of Chanukah. Direct link. Whereas the second opinion is using things that have absolutely nothing to do with Chanukah. They're bringing other, so to speak, side issues to justify how we perform Chanukah. Parei Hechag, the bulls of Sukkot. Sukkot is a different Yom Tov, has nothing to do with Chanukah. Hanhagas Adam B'Kodesh, or the general principle of Mailim B'Kodesh, which is a very important principle, but is not Chanukah specific. Let's put that into different words. Aleph Zeudin Big Gavra. We could look at this requirement that I should add more than the base amount of candles. That is a personal responsibility that I have to be more engaged in bringing light to the world or celebrating Chanukah or advertising the Chanukah miracle. By me adding more lights each night, Beis Hillel's view, or reducing the lights each night, Beis Shammai's view, I, as a person fulfilling the requirements of Chanukah, I have now added value to my fulfillment of the mitzvah. But the additional candles that I add do not have mitzvah value as the original candle has. In other words, the mitzvah of Chanukah is one candle per household per night. If I am now going to be ready from and add a second candle on the second night and a third candle on the third night, and for all the people in my family, that is my business. It doesn't turn those candles into a mitzvah. It turns me into a frum Jew. But there's another perspective, another possibility. Beis zerdin b'mitzvah gufa. Maybe it is integral to the mitzvah of Chanukah. In other words, ha'neres nasim chefze, the mitzvah ner Chanukah. When I add that second candle now becomes not just my contribution to Chanukah, it now becomes part of the mitzvah of Chanukah. That second candle is as valid as the first candle, and as much a mitzvah of Chanukah, what we call the chefza, the entity of the candle itself, has been incorporated into the mitzvah of Chanukah. These are the two views about where Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai are coming from. And by the way, there's a whole halachic discussion about practical implications. We'll look at one of them. There's this whole halachic discussion amongst Achronim. The Rebbe refers us over here to the Encyclopedia Talmudis that goes into this in a lot of detail and references where you could read up on it. That here's a practical difference. Let's say that a person gets up on the third night of Chanukah and only has enough oil for one light, so he says the bracha, lights the one light, and the next thing somebody walks in with extra oil, and now he can add the mahadrin component, light number 2 and number 3. Does he have to say a bracha again? Does he say a bracha? So that's going to come back to this point. If it's a chiyuv gavra, if it's my contribution to being a ready from Jew and being mahader b'mitzvahs, and therefore I have the will and the interest and the responsibility to light more candles, I wouldn't say a bracha on that because that's my contribution. But if I see those additional candles as being part of the mitzvah, well then maybe I should say a bracha over them. Whole debate, not for now. But what's relevant to us is that this gives us insight into the two perspectives as to why Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai had their opinions. The first opinion, which said that the opinions of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai are all about the days of Chanukah. Well, then you're telling me that the reason behind the amount of candles is linked to the mitzvah of Chanukah, the days of Chanukah, the essence of the holiday of Chanukah. In other words, each day that I add another candle, in Beis Hillel's view, which is what we do in practice, I'm adding more of the requirement of the mitzvah, or as we call it before, the chefta of Chanukah. Mitzvah shel Chanukah. Those additional candles have the same value as the initial baseline candle. They're part of the mitzvah of Chanukah. And you can actually translate this into something really practical. The more candles we have, the more we're advertising the miracle of Chanukah, which is the essence of what Chanukah is all about. Whereas if you come from the other perspective, that the reason Beis Shammai says you reduce the number of candles is because of something completely unrelated. How we treat the bulls of the Karbonos on Sukkot. And the reason Beis Hillel says add candles is nothing specific to Chanukah, but it's a generic principle that you should always add in Kedusha. Neither one of those reasons is in any way indelibly linked to Chanukah. Then that argument is obviously saying that our addition to the extra candles of Chanukah That's something I am contributing because it's not essential to Chanukah. If it were essential to Chanukah, the basis to learn that number would come from something related directly to Chanukah. I'm the one who has to increase my holiness. But it's not fundamental to the mitzvah itself. Now, once we know this information, that there are these two perspectives about is the additional part of the Chanukah licht, is that something related to the person and their spiritual development, or is it integral to the mitzvah and its fulfillment? So with that, we can actually pay attention to something that Rashi says on the Gemara, where he seems to include information we didn't need, but actually he's making exactly this point. Now we can pay attention to things that Rashi adds and highlights when he comments on this particular Gemara. This is what he says. When we talk about the declining number of bulls that were brought in the communal sacrifices on Sukkot, Rashi says, they reduce in number. Korbanos to Parshas Pinchas, as you could read in Parshas Pinchas, where it describes the korbanos that were brought on Sukkot. Why do I need that information right now? And then when he says Ma'anim B'Kodesh Ve'Meridin, the fact that Beis Hillel argues, at least according to this Amoira, that you always have to increase and not decrease in holiness, says Rashi, he tells us this is something we derive from a pasuk, and I'll tell you where you can read up on it. Now, so why did Rashi have to tell us that it's the korbanos as mentioned in Parshas Pinchas? And the two facts that he tells us about Ma'anim B'Kodesh also seem unnecessary to this Gemara. Aleph Lamadnu Mikra, that it's based on a pasuk. Why is that so important for us to know right now? And why do we have to know where that concept is derived in Menachos? Rashi is telling us important information. Rashi is telling us what we need to know, that this Amorio's opinion is that the rationale behind Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is not something which is linked specifically to Chanukah, and therefore the increase in candles that we have on Chanukah is a chiyuv gavra, not a chiyuv chefza. It's something that we're doing in our dedication to the mitzvah rather than something that is required by the mitzvah. So, why does he tell us that this is something we learn specifically in Parshas Pinchas? That we will know that the declining numbers of the bulls on Sukkot are not linked to Chanukah. And the fact that Rashi tells us Ma'anim B'Kodesh we learn out of a pasuk and in Menachos, because Zeu Aleph, he wants us to know that it's limud v'hira b'teresh v'chsav. He wants us to know it's from a pasuk. And a pasuk obviously is not something that could be a basis for Chanukah, because the mitzvah Chanukah kulu mitzvah sofrim, because the whole Chanukah is a rabbinic mitzvah, as the Rambam makes abundantly clear when he gets into Hilchos Chanukah. And then he tells us where we learn about this, which is in Menachos. He's drawing our attention to the fact that the Gemara would speak about Ma'anim B'Kodesh in a much more general sense, in that particular case about Menachos, nothing to do with Chanukah. Why? Because we need to know that that second Manda Omar is not saying that the rationale behind Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is something founded in Chanukah principles, and therefore it is not something intrinsic to the Chanukah mitzvah. Now, with that in mind, we're going to go back to the second scenario we looked at earlier about a practical difference between if you're going to say that it's because of Yom HaNechnosim or Yom HaYotzim, or if you're going to say it's because of Parei Chag and Ma'anim B'Kodesh, and we're actually going to see it completely differently to how we saw before. If he has Bezem Machlokus and move on. So with this insight into the machlokas, whether it's chefza or gavra, whether it's something that is intrinsic to Chanukah or something that is unrelated to Chanukah but just giving us insight, and now let's go back to that second scenario. What's the second scenario? You arrive on the third night of Chanukah without enough oil to light 3 lamps. What do you do? The question that we asked was, not enough oil for 3 lamps on night number 3, so is it better to light 1 to go to the baseline of Ishu Beisoi, Ner Ishu Beisoi, or is it better to at least do the best you can? Eino Machrachas is not as clear as we thought it was, because originally we said, well, according to Beis Hillel, you're supposed to be marking the days that pass, and therefore you can't do that because you don't have enough oil for 3 lamps. There is 0 value in doing 2 lamps because that's not the night that we're on now, so you may as well go back to the base version of the mitzvah, which is a single lamp per household. That's what we thought. Now we're going to argue differently. Now we're going to argue that even according to Beis Hillel, who says Keneged Yom Hayotzin, if you only have enough oil tonight, night number 3, for 2 lights, light 2. Why? Yes, of course, you're not going to hit your target of the most muhuder version of lighting Chanukah candles to illustrate how many days of Chanukah have passed. You can't do that. You don't have enough oil. True. Still, at least you should do the best you can. Some of the days that have passed. Why? Because this version of understanding Beis Hillel is that Beis Hillel believes that additional lights are fundamental to the mitzvah of Chanukah. They're not just a token of my dedication to Hashem. Therefore, do as much of the mitzvah as you possibly can. If you can't get to 3 lamps tonight on the 3rd night of Chanukah, at least do 2, because it's critical to the mitzvah to have increased the lights. Now it's a Chanukah shiadlik yu b'shleimus yoiser v'yifarsim u'loi rakas iker nes haneres legames ha'yisofa b'nes legabei yoim harishon. Because what you will be doing over here is your Chanukah lights will now be a little better than they were on night number 1, and they will advertise to the world that the miracle had increased from night number 1, which is essential to the mitzvah, and that's what you've got to be doing. Where it is going to be very tricky is when you get to the end of Chanukah. Let's say that somebody doesn't have enough oil, that you can't even get to last night's level. So in other words, we said night number 3, you could at least light 2 lamps. But here's another scenario. Let's say you're on the last night of Chanukah, which is night number 8, and you've only got 6 candles or enough oil for 6 lamps. Well, then you're actually going to have a whole different way of having to deal with this. If I go with the opinion that says Beis Hillel is concerned that we should mark how many days of Chanukah have passed, and that is intrinsic and fundamental to the mitzvah of Chanukah, well, then you better light as much as you possibly can. Because as we've just said, it's fundamental to the mitzvah. So light as much as you possibly can, which tonight is only going to be 6 lamps, even though it's the 8th night of Chanukah, but at least you've done your best to fulfill the chefza of the mitzvah. The chefza of the mitzvah is adding light, mehadrin. Whereas the other opinion, and this is the part that's going to be the opposite to how we originally understood it, where the reason why Beis Hillel says you have to increase in your candles is in order to have more light. Now you're not going to have more light, because last night you lit 7 candles, and tonight you only have enough to light 6 candles. If you're going to light those 6 candles, you'll be going backwards. And those additional lamps that you're supposed to add are not fundamental to the mitzvah, because they learn from other issues outside of Chanukah. So it's you, the Gavra, who's supposed to be doing your best to add to the light of the mitzvah. But if you can't, the mitzvah won't be lacking. Well then, logically, if you cannot light the amount that you're supposed to, and if you're going to light what you have, you'll actually be going backwards from last night, then it's better not to add your Gavra, your personal growth hidur, which will actually undermine the original mitzvah. Rather go back to the original mitzvah and light 1 lamp. Because in this scenario, if you as an individual fulfilling your goal of spiritual advancement, you're going to add more candles, you're actually going to be going backwards from last night, which defeats the purpose of your spiritual advancement. Rather get to the Iker mitzvah, which according to this opinion, the Iker mitzvah is only Ner Ish Ubeisai. So at least you have the opportunity right now to fulfill the original mitzvah as it was originally mandated, 1 lamp. So last night, ironically, you would have lit 7 lights. Tonight, you only have the option of lighting 6, which would be considered going backwards, and it's not fundamental to the mitzvah in this particular version. Therefore, it's better that you leave your hidurim out of the way, even though you won't be able to achieve your personal growth, but you won't at least be taking away from the mitzvah, and you go right back to how the mitzvah is kept in its most basic form, lighting just 1 lamp.